I've spent an insane amount of time and only slightly less money to make plugs and molds like this and like this so that they could produce literally quantity 1 carbon fiber part out of each one. And more than 90% of all that effort goes into the mold. It doesn't even go into the part. And that's the reason for today's video. I want to find the cheapest, easiest, fastest way to make a mold that'll still produce a good part. And for that, we're going to be using 3D printing. I have some successes, as shown here, and some failures. So let's get into it. I'm stepping into a huge unknown when it comes to using 3D printed parts for molds for composites, and I don't know what I don't know. So we're just going to go ahead and start with what I do know. So I will be using PLA or PETG for these molds. It turns out after doing some research that this material is compatible with both polyester resins and epoxy resins, so we're good to go there. I also know that both of those resins will bond permanently to this material, and that's why I used 5-minute epoxies to hold these two parts together. That said, you cannot use these unless you do something to prep the mold to release the part. Now, I'm kind of just winging it here, and that's also why I'm starting with these small parts, the foot pedal brackets, and I'm going to try and do something, I think, a little unique. I'm going to be laying down a layer of peel ply between my mold and my part, and that is what I'm going to be using as my release material. Like I said, I don't know if it's going to work, but based on what I've learned in the past, that should do a decent job at releasing the parts. So in that case, I don't actually need to do anything to prep the actual mold. Also, just to keep these things simple and cheap and easy, I'm using a bunch of old scrap carbon to make these parts, so really it's no loss but time if this thing all goes south. It's probably also important to note that the plan is to just do a hand wet layup with this for a couple reasons. One, I don't know if the actual mold can withstand the full vacuum that's required for resin infusion. Two, this part doesn't need to be crazy light. It's going to be overbuilt anyways, and we're probably going to use maybe 6 or 7 layers of 6K carbon to make this bracket. The first thing I'm going to do is lay down some blue painter's tape on the inside of this mold that I can then take out and make my template for both the peel ply and the carbon layers. With the template finished, it's pretty quick work to run around it with this roller knife and get the carbon cut out. The next thing on the agenda is to get the vacuum bag ready. Now, unlike resin infusions where you put the vacuum bag directly on the mold surface, we're going to be creating an envelope bag, which is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to put the entire mold and part all the way into the bag and vacuum bag the entire thing. Now, one important thing to note here is you want your envelope bag to be at least 2 to 3 times bigger than your mold. Too much vacuum bag is always better than too little. The reason you're doing that now is so that you have one less thing to screw around with while the resin is in your part curing and you need to get it under vacuum. All right, I think I've done all the prep work for this layup. So let's touch on all the materials quickly and the game plan. PLA mold, that's going to be released with just a layer of peel ply. That peel ply is from Fiberglass. We're going to make the layup out of 6K carbon. You can see the templates cut there. I was going to start with 6 layers and then do 12 on the face for bulk. I've reduced that down to 4 and 4. I just think 6 was overkill. So that's 6K carbon, 2x2 twill. For the epoxy resin that we're going to be using, this is Fiberglass new 2000 series or 2001 series laminating epoxy resin. It lays up in room temperature and cures in room temperature, no need for post-cure, and it's got really good properties, so that stuff is going to be pretty sweet. For the vacuum bag, this standard vacuum bag, we're envelope bagging it. I did make this little pigtail. In college, I learned about this. You can basically make this pigtail with a little bit of breather in there, and you can use those between envelope bags, and it just saves you some hassle later. So that's prepped and ready to go. We are using just standard breather. That breather is put in there for two things. One, it's to distribute the vacuum, so it gives the air a path to travel when you start pulling it down, and it also soaks up extra resin. We are going to lay this in pretty resin rich. To get a rough idea on the amount of resin that I'll be using, I'm going to weigh out the carbon, and then usually like a perfect part is like 50-50 by weight, carbon to resin. I'm going to double that just so I have extra. So we'll have twice the amount of resin ready to go into the carbon. I'll lay in the peel ply with Super 77 spray adhesive. That's just to keep it in place into the mold. On top of that, I'll start just wetting out and laying down each layer individually. So we'll do one on the base. That's the bigger t-shirt size template. And then between each one of those, we'll put the rectangular template on the face to give that bulk where I want it on that face. So we'll build it all the way up. I have some extra peel ply over here that I'll use to cover the whole mold and any exposed surface when we're done with the layup. And then I have extra breather that I can put over the whole part before I place it into the bag. I'll be using my vacuum. I'll probably set it to like, I don't know, 15 inches of mercury, like a half vacuum. It doesn't need to be crazy, and it just needs to basically hold it into the mold and make sure that it produces a good part. So we won't go crazy with that. All right, there it is. It's all vacuum bagged. I got it down to about 25 inches of mercury, which I think is plenty. I made sure to come in here. Oh, there's kicking back on. I came in here and pushed all the edges in. That's where I really wanted to get into those corners and make sure that it was nice and close so I don't get any interference from my bolt holes. Hindsight, maybe I should have added another layer or two of breather. It's pretty rich in there, so yeah, it's soaked up quite a lot, but I think it's going to be all right. This is not critical, and we are just experimenting to see if this is going to work. So next up, we'll wait for 24 hours and see if we can get it out of this thing. It's been a little under 24 hours, but I think it's fully cured. Let's see if we can get this thing out of the bag. All right, that's good. All right. Well, that absolutely did not work at all. Let my failures be your lessons. Couple things I think that caused the issue. One, I should have put a bigger draft angle on the outer edges. There's no reason they need to be vertical, and I think that's caused a pretty big issue when trying to get these things out. Not that that was the only problem. The peel ply worked kind of okay-ish. I think I should have just played it safe and put in a whole bunch of wax in the bottom of this thing just to give it a barrier so it would hopefully release a little bit better, but that is what it is. And the parts are basically trash too. It looks like they were super lean. They're delaminating. It's not as strong as I thought it was going to be. It's soft. It's not brittle. And so I was like, well, how much does it weigh? And so I threw it back on the scale. And if you remember, it was 50 grams-ish worth the carbon. And it weighs in at 65. So even though I used almost, I'd say like 150 grams of resin. None of it actually got into the part. My assumption is that the mold is porous, and as I pulled a vacuum on it, the air that was on the inside of this made its way out through the surface and went through the carbon and then into the peel ply, and it just sucked, or into the breather, and it just sucked all the resin in it. I think most of the resin ended up in the breather and not in the part. So I'm going to redesign the mold. I'm going to put a better draft angle in here because there's no reason for it to be vertical. That should help the part come out. I'm also going to print this thing with no layers on the base, so the vacuum has direct access to the infill, and that should prevent any of that trapped air from going through the surface and into the part, and it should just come straight out the bottom. So I think that's going to help. I'm debating if I try to seal it with maybe a thin coat of epoxy and let that dry, or if I actually want to try and seal the face. I'm not there yet. I don't know what to do with that. But I think we'll start with that. And then we'll just do this all over again. I mean, we'll get there eventually, right? So after a lot of thought, and to keep with the theme of the least amount of effort to produce a part with 3D printing, I'm not going to seal the face of this mold. The reason you would want to is because since it does have vacuum accessible to the back of the face, and if that face is porous, that vacuum will suck all of that epoxy resin, or some, through the surface of that mold and out of your composite part. My thought process there is the epoxy resin is thick enough, viscous enough, and the holes in the surface of this are probably so small that the amount of loss will probably be very, very minimal. So I'm going to ignore it. I am, though, from what I learned last time, going to use Partall Paste for my mold release. I want it to come out of this a little bit easier, and I'm hoping that that will help me do that. Everything else about this layup will go basically exactly the same, with one more exception. Typically, you would use what's called release film on a hand wet layup like this that would go between your peel ply and your breather. That release film is a film that doesn't stick to the resin, but it has some very small holes in it that limits the flow of the resin from the carbon part into the breather, which, as you remember, that was my main issue. The breather sucked up all that resin. I don't want to go order more materials, and I just want to use what I have, so I'm going to replace that with just standard vacuum bag. The only difference between the vacuum bag is there are no holes in it, and it will inhibit any amount of flow going through that membrane. So what I plan to do is to cut that vacuum bag to be just the size of the final part. That will leave exposed carbon to the breather around the perimeter of that part, and it should help some of that excess resin evacuate around the outside of the part, but still, my hope, leave enough resin in the part to make sure we don't have what happened the last time. My goal is to have a resin-rich part as opposed to a resin-lean part, and that should get us there. I took a quick pause in the middle of this layup, and excuse the audio because I'm in a rush, but you can see now here how I'm using this vacuum bag to be a barrier between this and the breather so that I don't suck all the resin out of this part. It doesn't go to the edge of the mold, it only kind of goes to the edge of the actual part. And so my hope is that will help keep the resin in the carbon and we won't end up where we were last time. If it wasn't already obvious, I don't know what I'm doing, and this is all experimental, and these are on all non-flight critical components, and I'm not going to do anything that would risk my life. So don't use this as advice. Don't follow what I'm doing. Just come along for the ride. And there is the part. The whole demolding process was relatively uneventful. I did actually put the part and the mold in front of a space heater and just kind of let it post cure. fully aware that the PLA mold might actually warp, which it did a whole lot. The part actually doesn't fit in the mold anymore at all. But the part is solid. It is stiff. You can even tell if I hit it against something solid. You can kind of hear it ring, where the old piece is just like a wet noodle. It's just soft. So all in all, everything worked out really well. This thing's really strong. I need to trim this thing up and see if it actually fits into the helicopter. I'm a little curious if any of that warping from the mold transferred into the part, but I'll know relatively quickly as I go and throw this into the helicopter. So we'll get this trimmed up. I'll throw it in there and we'll see how it actually fits. All right, the next project on the list is the extended dash. Now we're going a little rogue here. One, I'm going to be using polyester resin and just fiberglass. Reason for that is if I do this right, once I pull this section out, it should mate perfectly up to the existing dash that I have, and I'll just have to bond those together, ferret, and make it look pretty. For aesthetics, I will be putting a carbon fiber like face where all of the gauges will go, so it'll still look cool, but there's just really no reason to make the dash out of carbon fiber. I put a whole lot of thought into these molds. These are made out of PETG. The reason for that is it's slightly higher temperature tolerant. That way, if the polyester resin starts to kick off and get warm, it won't warp the molds and they should be fine. I had to, because I stretched the literal limits of my bamboo printer, the 10 by 10, it literally barely fit. So I had to split this into 3 parts. There's a left, there's a right, and then there's a kind of a centerpiece to join it together. There are locating features on both faces. They're basically just spheres or hemispheres, half spheres. And then I used like a double wedge feature on, this is like the key to pull all of this together and hold it there. There's also 6 through bolts or holes for all thread, so that will hold the whole thing together. And then I'll use 4 more bolts to secure the key in place. So that'll hold it all together. I don't plan on doing much prep on this thing either. We'll see if it works. I am going to throw in some Partall Paste just to fill the cracks, but I'm not going to do anything to prep the surface. For the most part, it's actually really nice, and I think it's going to be okay. We're going to use gel coat first, so that'll be the layer that will go in initially. That'll give me a nice, clean, I guess, surface to play with and prep once the part comes out. Then I'm going to go ahead and throw in a layer of fiberglass cloth. We'll backfill that with some fiberglass chop mat, and then go back to a cloth again. This should produce a relatively lightweight, pretty strong part that, once again, I can just bond directly to the existing fiberglass dash. So that's the plan. I got some prep work to do here. I need to clean out some holes. I need to tap some holes in plastic and get this thing all kind of bolted together. And then, yeah, we'll give this thing a shot. I spent about 20 minutes maybe with 120 grit sandpaper, just scuffing up all the surfaces and cleaning up all the rough spots and seam lines where I didn't like them. The main focus was down on the bottom face. That face is about 15 degrees relative to the print angle of the 3D printer, and so those step lines are the biggest and most prevalent. They are not gone by any means, but I think it's good enough, and I want to see, again, just how little effort I can put into a 3D printed part and actually make something good out of it. The next step is to lay in a bunch of Partall Paste. So I'll probably do at least 6 layers. I don't know, we'll see how it builds up. I'll focus on those really rough spots and make sure they're filled in. And we'll just, I don't know, assess this once that's finished. All right, the mold is mostly prepped. You can see I added kind of a makeshift flange out of blue masking tape. This will kind of keep any of the material, if it does come out of the mold and starts to lay over the edges, it won't mechanically lock itself in the mold, and it'll give me something to get behind the part to kind of help release it once it's finished. I have like 5 layers of Partall Paste number 2 in here. I laid it on really thick, let it set for about 20 minutes to flash off, and then I lightly kind of buffed it down with the goal to build material up. I wanted to kind of fill in that rough surface finish from the 3D print and hopefully not cause too many issues with releasing the part. Out of an abundance of caution, I'm also going to be using PVA. This stuff I don't like to use on a really pretty mold because I haven't had very much success in getting a nice surface finish when this lays down. But since we're already dealing with a pretty rough surface already, I figured throwing this on is only going to do me some good. So we're going to throw that on, and then we'll get into the gel coat. For the gel coat, I'm going to be using regular gel coat without wax. This is not tooling gel coat. I'm going to mix it and kick it off at about 1.75%, I think. It's about 70 degrees down in the basement. I want it to kick relatively fast, but I don't want it to get too hot for this PETG mold. We're going to go ahead and lay down 2 layers of gel coat, let that tack off, basically so you can touch it with your glove and it doesn't remove any material. And then once that second coat is mostly cured, we'll continue on with the fiberglass. All right, the second coat of gel coat is in. We're gonna go ahead and let that tack up. In the meantime, I pulled out all of my cut pieces of fiberglass cloth. This is 8-ounce fiberglass cloth. I decided to use 3 layers of just cloth and not use any mat. That should produce a slightly stiffer part and be a little bit more lightweight, so I think all good there. This piece will go down into the face of the mold, and then I split it up into a left and a right piece, so it will wrap around and there will be an overlap right at the top and the bottom, which I think will be just fine. And then over here I have little pieces for the flanges. So this is for the center flange that goes down, and then I have one for the left and the right side of either side of the mold. We'll be using polyester resin for this to match our polyester gel coat. And yeah, we're just going to lay in one at a time in small batches and hopefully not get this thing too hot. Here we are 24 hours later. It seems to be fully cured, and it's time to see if we can get this thing out of the mold. These are great sound. Well, that didn't exactly go as planned. The part did come out. It is really nice. I had to completely destroy the mold, unfortunately, but that's why I printed it, and that's why I didn't spend very much time prepping it. It served its purpose, and for the $20 or so in filament, it was well worth the cost. So next up is I need to get this trimmed and get it all kind of prepped so I can mount it to the other dash. But overall, it's pretty awesome. I like it. All right, so how did we do and what did we learn? Well, 3D printing molds is a perfectly good, viable way to make a mold cheap and quick. And you can actually do a whole lot with it right off the printer and very minimal prep work to make your part. We'll start with the foot pedal bracket. I went ahead and I trimmed it up This thing is built like a brick shit house. Stronger than hell, probably way overkill, and definitely stronger than the fuselage. It weighs in at about 100 grams, so very, very light and very, very strong. Obviously, it fits the contour in the helicopter perfectly, and it exceeds, honestly, my expectations. The do's and don'ts. One, I screwed up and I was basically just impatient. I put the part under a space heater to get it to get hot, and in doing so, I warped the mold pretty bad. So this mold is now scrap. The peel ply idea worked out perfect. And if I didn't mention it before, the reason I really wanted to do that is because I'm going to be bonding this into the helicopter, and I wanted that peel ply texture to help me with that bonding surface. And so that was it kind of killed two birds with one stone. It gave me that texture, but also worked as a perfect release agent to get the part out of the mold. So that was really cool. I would absolutely do this again. There's probably like $5 in printing material in this thing, and basically no prep work to get a part out of it. So super, super cool. I'll definitely do that again. Now on to the dash. Similar lessons learned, but slightly more catastrophic. That is what's left over of the mold. Half of it actually could probably be used again. The other half, not so much. This is mostly my fault. I think the part has very, very low draft angles in some spots, and I think it just got locked in the mold. It took me a really long time to get it out of that mold, but it didn't actually hurt the part at all, and it wasn't stuck. It's not like it bonded itself to it. There was no transfer of material between the mold and the part, so I think it was just locked in there geometrically more than anything else. Once again, about $20 in material for that entire mold, and the dimensional accuracy is really spot on. And all I put down, I scuffed it up with some sandpaper, I threw down some Partall Paste release, and followed that up with a little bit of PVA. So almost no real work at all getting that mold ready. The gel coat turned out basically perfect. No alligators. This is ready to just get prepped and painted. I am going to mount this part to the original dash, and that actually lined up, basically perfect. I shouldn't be surprised. I scanned the part, and shocking, it's basically perfect. So I will be bonding those two together. Then I'm going to fill it in with some fiberglass to make it a little bit more strong, but that should be golden as well. This thing weighs about 750 grams, so still really on the light side. It's plenty stiff and strong, and I think it's going to serve the purpose perfectly. So long story short, 3D printed molds are absolutely the way to go, especially with single-use kind of like parts. It beats the heck out of making a whole fiberglass mold, starting with a plug, etc., etc. So I'm going to use this definitely a lot more going forward. Just makes a lot more sense, both time and money, to do it 3D printing way than to do it the old traditional way. And with that, my entire basement is a complete hot mess, and I've got some cleaning up to do. I'm curious what you guys think. Are 3D printed molds, I don't know, a good idea? Would you use it? Would you use it now that you've seen me be halfway successful with it? Let me know in the comments below. As always, go build something cool, never stop learning, and we'll see you on the next one.